Obviously real pleased to be here today. Today we wanted to make a stop and talk about kind of building off of the state of the state, the good feelings about how things have changed, particularly the last 2 years. Went from a budget deficit to a budget surplus, went from high unemployment to significantly lowered unemployment, went from years of raising property taxes to 2 years now in a row where property taxes have gone down, went to an improved business climate. To today kind of put an exclamation point on it when you have a company like this adding another 50 jobs, making a $7 million investment, 70,000 square foot expansion. This is the kind of feeling we want all across the state, and so we feel good. This is a prime example of what we're hoping will happen all across the state of Wisconsin as employers, small business owners in particular, see that things have changed for the better here in the state of Wisconsin. Go ahead.
Okay, quick question. Kind of separate from today, though, Governor. Were you or your staff made aware at all last night of the bomb scare prior to your speech, or were you made aware of it afterwards?
No, we knew right away. We knew. My chief of staff let me know right away when Capitol Police knew, even before he was in the building, that they had found through intelligence information about a credible threat. And the Capitol Police and local law enforcement did a tremendous job being well prepared. They identified who they thought the eventual suspect was, and they were prepared once that individual made an entrance into the Capitol. So they did, I think, an exceptional job. I called 2 of the officers today and thanked them for their professional work because it was a credible threat and could have ended up obviously very dangerously, and it did not, thankfully. But it was good work all the way around.
Do you think you were target of this?
I don't think so. I mean, again, I don't want to get too far into the case, but from the information they gave us, I think the individuals probably got some other challenges that weren't specific to any individual.
For the 100 pages of threats that were made against you, there's been no prosecution. What's your
I mean, I hope a lot of them, as we thought at the time, were idle threats, that they were maybe more politically motivated than anything else. But, you know, they initially took each one of them seriously, just like they do anything that would happen now, and try and determine what's credible and what's not. But, you know, I've said all along, you've heard about the threats before, even more now that you've seen the total list, and I don't do anything irrational when it comes to public safety, but by the same token, obviously here today, other places, I don't let it affect my public schedule. I'm still going to get out and see the citizens of the state. We're just not going to be reckless in how we do it.
Governor, earlier this morning, Senator Baldwin was in Glendale taking a tour of Johnson Controls, kind of a similar event to this, articulating her vision of the economy and government intervention, talking about how people need to pay their fair share. We're talking about taxes. Quite different from what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think if you look, I mean, good example is we've looked at some of the economists in the Department of Revenue have looked ahead to where revenue projections might be in the next year or so, and they look at an overall improving economy in the state. But one area of concern is that sales tax revenues, while they'll be up, may not be up as much as we thought in the past. And one of the primary reasons they pinpoint to that is that because the federal government failed to act on maintaining the payroll tax holiday, that people have less money in their pockets and in turn might make fewer purchases than they'd anticipated in the past. That to me is a prime example of how if you take more money out of the hands of the consumers, in this case the American people, in our case specifically here in Wisconsin, and you put it in the hands of the government, it's going to have an impact on the economy. Conversely, what we're talking about is because we made tough but prudent decisions over the last 2 years, we have a budget surplus, and we believe that a significant portion of that should go back to the taxpayers so they in turn can fuel the economy, make more purchases, and put more people back to work.
Regarding the mining legislation, if I'm correct, the proposed new bill allows for a contested case hearing after a decision has been made on a permit, whereas previously there was a mechanism to have one beforehand. Since that could become a point of contention, would you be agreeable possibly to changing that to have it remain before the decision is made?
Yeah, what I've said, as I said last night in generalities, but what I've said specifically all along is I want a bill that will streamline the process for safe and environmentally sound mining, and a bill that ultimately leads to mining jobs in the state. If we can make further modifications to what they've approved, and I've said even last night in my speech I was willing to make reasonable modifications and to work with lawmakers in both parties to do that. If we can do that, if we can get a bill that can pass, a bill that ultimately makes it easier to create a mine in the state while still protecting clean air, clean land, and clean water, I'm willing to do it. I just don't want to go down the path, as they've talked about in the past, of a bill that's called the mining bill but doesn't lead to mining jobs in the state, I think that would be a waste for all of us if we missed that opportunity. So in terms of specifics, we're willing to look at things like that. I'm not going to negotiate in detail here today via the press, but we'll certainly have our folks work with lawmakers in both parties. I had some lawmakers last night. I had a reception for all of them after the state of the state, and had members from both political parties bring up suggestions of things they're interested in, and we're very willing to work with them on.
Just time for two more.
Can we ask you about the national hot button today, gun control? As you know, governors around the country, in New York and other states have taken their own measures. Is there any reasonable measure that you consider the state taking that you would push for?
Well, we'll look at it. I mean, we just saw what was announced today by the executive order. We'll have to review that. One of the things I'm in the process of doing over the last few weeks, we're going to be meeting in about a week or so, is meeting with mental health professionals, law enforcement folks, others who work in areas like this to give us some feedback, particularly when it comes to the simple question of how do people get to a point like this? Whether it's, as we saw yesterday, with a chemical type device, or whether it's a firearm, whether it's any other weapon out there, how do people get to the point where they become so disturbed that they're capable of making these sorts of poor choices, tragic poor choices? And so we're going to spend the majority of our time looking at mental health services and what can and may be done to improve that.
On the federal level, though, do you think things like they're talking about assault weapons bans, banning the high-capacity clips, universal background checks, are those good ideas?
Again, I'd have to look. I mean, those are things I've heard talked about before. What I said originally after Connecticut was there are some people who wanted to go very far in gun control. There were other end of the spectrum people that wanted to go far in putting armed security into the schools. My view is that either of those two don't really get at the heart of the issue, which I still think is how do such a limited number, it's still a very limited number, but how do people in those conditions get to the point where there's that level of mental disturbance that they're able to make a decision like that. And I think it's best if we address how they get to that point, because no matter what the weapon might, I mean, eventually, as we saw yesterday, if it's not a firearm, it could be something else. We've seen in years past other explosive devices. There are, fortunately, for people who are tragically challenged, going to be other ways of causing harm. I think the best thing we can do is focus on how do we provide the kind of help and assistance they need in a crisis situation not to get to that point.
Governor, on the mining, one more question on the
Yeah, sure.
mining. Critics have said that it could prompt outside parties, such as the Army Corps of Engineers, to do their own environmental review and, in effect, slowing it down. Are you worried that the bill may, in fact, do that?
The bill won't. I mean, the reality is critics who brought up the Army Corps of Engineers or a lawsuit ignore the fact that that happens whether, no matter what the bill looks like. In that what we'd like to do is simplify the process, so any requirements that would be needed by the DNR and the company in terms of a permit would somewhat parallel what they're going to need to do with the Army Corps of Engineers. But that's going to happen either way. I mean, that's something the Army Corps of Engineers has to do regardless of what our law is in the state of Wisconsin. And so I think most of those concerns are red herrings. What we'd like to do in terms of streamline the process, though, is make it as parallel to what an applicant for a permit would have to do with the Army Corps, just because it would simplify their process, and that's really what we're trying to get at. But in terms of slowing it down, it's the best thing we can do is have a simple process that parallels or comes close to paralleling what they're going to have to do otherwise. If we can do that, it's going to make for a quicker construction cycle and a quicker permit.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, Governor.